Morning, everyone, and welcome. We are here with the Last Prisoner Project. We have Sarah Gersten along with three constituents from the Last Prisoner Project to discuss their time in incarceration and the impact that that's had on their lives following. So Sarah, I'll go ahead and kick it off to you. Good morning, Sarah. How are you?
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone at Kush.com for helping us put out this live stream. This is the second in our Kush LPP webinar series. And I am so thrilled to be able to be here today with three of our constituents, Evelyn LaChapelle, Natalia Wade, and Stephanie Shepard. In a minute, I'm going to let them introduce themselves and give you all a little bit more about their stories. But for anyone who might not be familiar with Last Prisoner Project and the work that we do, we are a criminal justice nonprofit focused specifically on releasing anyone who is incarcerated on a cannabis offense. But we don't like to end that work with release. As we know in this country, and as you'll hear some of today, we actually make it incredibly difficult for individuals to rebuild their lives and re-enter society post-incarceration. So part of what we work to do at Last Prisoner Project is ensure that our constituents have the resources, the support, and the mentorship that they need coming out of incarceration to rebuild their lives and really be fully free. So yeah, I'm super excited to dive into this today. Obviously, we are in a moment where the country is particularly focused on issues of racial justice and criminal justice reform. And cannabis justice is a huge piece of that. A lot of our supporters are members of the cannabis community and the cannabis industry. And I think even our own supporters often don't realize the scope of this problem. We are still every day arresting and sentencing folks to really egregious incarceration sentences for cannabis offenses. And you'll hear from the woman today, really low level cannabis offenses can land someone in prison for really lengthy sentences. Of course, arrest rates and conviction rates and lengths of sentences are very much affected by the color of your skin. And disproportionately, our Black and Brown communities end up going to prison for much lengthier sentences for the same cannabis offenses as their white counterparts. So we really see at Last Prisoner Project that cannabis justice reform can be a really useful tool to address some of the systemic inequalities that this country is working actively to repair. So with that, I want to dive in and really just hear from each of you the stories of really the horrific experience that you've suffered due to the criminalization of cannabis. And then, we'll have some time to explore how we as a cannabis community, and particularly how the industry, can do better to support both the individuals that are still incarcerated for cannabis offenses, as well as individuals at the reentry stage and those that might actually want to participate in the legal industry post-incarceration. So Evelyn, I want to start with you, and if you could just give us a brief background of your experience dealing with being incarcerated on a marijuana offense.
Absolutely. Very brief background. If anyone wants to know the true story, I got that too. But in about 2 minutes, to sum it up, I was sentenced in 2013. I recommend everyone go back to 2013 in their mind. Cannabis was definitely legal and had been in California. 2013, I was sentenced to 87 months in prison for depositing cannabis profits into my personal bank account. I was convicted on 3 charges: conspiracy with the intent to distribute marijuana, conspiracy to money launder, and structuring financial, I forget it. The charge is called structuring. So I got 3 felony charges, 87 months in prison. for the act of depositing cannabis profits into my bank account. I spent 5 years in custody, and I am now doing 4 years of federal probation. And I think part of the issue is that most people think that I can come home, get expunged, and life moves on as it is. But the truth is, when you're doing federal time, your sentence and your probation can only, and your record can only be cleared through the order of the President of the United States of America. And so it is not automatic, restarting of your life, and definitely a victim of systematic racism when we're thinking about, these 3 brown women who spent time in prison. And so that is the gist of the story and the story.
Well, thank you so much for that, Evelyn. And you touched on something that I just think is important to highlight. In the federal system, there is no opportunity for parole. So as Evelyn noted, if you're trying to get resentenced federally, really your only avenue for relief is through a commutation from the president. That is certainly not an easy thing to achieve. So it just speaks to, once you're inside the system, how difficult it is, even if you're facing a truly unjust charge, to be released. So yes, definitely important to note, and thank you for that. Natalia, I'd like to turn to you if you could introduce yourself, and again, just a brief overview of what you've experienced.
Yes, I actually was on the same case as Evelyn. So I have the same charges, conspiracy to distribute marijuana, structuring, and conspiracy for money laundering. They first offered me 239 months. So with years, I believe that is 19 or 20 years.
Yeah.
Something like that. So thankfully I did not take that, but I also was sentenced to 87 months. I ended up doing 6 years and 3 months because of my health condition. I enrolled into the program, the drug program, but at the end of the program, after I took the program, they told me that I wasn't able to get the time off. So I had to stay another 15 months. And that's why I served a little bit of a longer sentence than Evelyn did. I just got home December of 19, and serving probation, 4 years probation. It's definitely a struggle. The health in prison is absolutely ridiculous. A lot of people think that you're faking, so you don't get the medical attention that you need. They hide things from you. I came home and found out my medical condition is worse than what they told me. They're all it seems like they're all in cahoots together without letting you know what's going on with you. They'll just give you things to suppress and to get you out of their faces. So I've been dealing a lot with my health issue and trying to get back on track and just trying to get the help and the referrals that I need. So.
Thank you for that, Natalia. And that's something I'm definitely going to circle back to you on, is access to healthcare when you're inside. Definitely something I want to explore a little more. But briefly, Stephanie Shepard, I would love for you to introduce yourself and just give us a brief background on your charges and your sentence.
Okay, thank you. My name is Stephanie Shepard. I was arrested in 2010. I stayed on pretrial for a year. My charges were, I had one charge, and that was conspiracy to distribute 1,000 or more kilos of marijuana. When I was arrested, go back, my ex-boyfriend got arrested for selling marijuana. He was in jail for 6 months. His attorney called me and asked me if I would come speak with him about my ex's case. I did it. What turns out is he had a pacemaker put in, he had a heart condition, he needed a heart transplant, and he was essentially doing horrible in jail. His attorney wanted to know if I gave him a place to stay, would I do that if he got out on medical bond till his sentencing? And I agreed to that. So he was in jail for 6 months when I got that phone call. They never came for me, looked for me. I worked in the same place, lived in the same place. Everything about my life was the same. I never heard from the police. I went to court for him, spoke with the judge. The judge recommended he be released into my custody. And an hour later, the attorney called me and said, they're fighting it. They said, you're involved. So with that being said, I was on pretrial for a year. During that year, I was still selling real estate. About halfway through, I went to renew my license for my real estate license. And the first question was, have you been convicted of a felony? And I said, no. And the second question was, do you have a felony pending? And as soon as I said yes, my renewal was denied. So I'm on pretrial. I have no job. I'm in New York. My family's all in California. So it was a very difficult time. When I got found guilty, I was in the holding facility for 3 months till I got sentenced to 120 months. My first time offense. That was something that the only thing I remember about that day is my sister being in the courtroom and just screaming. When she heard 120 months, I didn't even know, it didn't even compute in my head what 120 months was until my attorney grabbed my hand and he said, it's 10 years. The getting adjusted to prison, it wasn't the hardest thing. It was being away from your family. My father was 91 years old when I went to prison. He passed away while I was in prison. So that's more so than just the act of going there. It's being physically away from your family.
Absolutely. And I know that's something that Evelyn experienced too, having to lose a family member. This is something, you know, I hear all the time, especially from those that are serving long sentences, the experience of trying to deal with that while you're incarcerated. Even if you're able to attend a funeral, you're shackled. You know, you get out for one day to literally, as Stephanie, I think you put it, go see the body. You don't have a chance to heal, to grieve. So, I mean, of course, just tremendously sorry for the experience that you have all faced, and having to deal with that is just truly unimaginable. I really want to dive a little deeper into each of your sentences. You guys have all just described kind of the actions that warranted these sentences in the eyes of our justice system. Evelyn and Natalia, essentially, you were depositing funds into a bank account that were tied to cannabis sales. Stephanie, you were doing something quite selfless and acting as a caretaker for someone who was a marijuana dealer. Those activities are what branded you as felons in the eyes of the law and gave you these really lengthy prison sentences. I think this is something I see as an attorney quite often with female defendants. because of the way our conspiracy laws work, very oftentimes, we will have men, frankly, who are really the kingpins of an operation or who are engaging on a much larger scale in the unlawful activity. And then women who are playing very minor roles in these operations get caught up on these conspiracy charges. And as Evelyn, you said, money laundering, structuring, and end up with incredibly long sentences in comparison to the actual activity that was taking place. And I know we've seen, I think, since these laws have passed in the 80s, just a skyrocketing in terms of the rates of incarceration of women. Did you guys find that the women you were incarcerated with sort of shared similar backgrounds and similar stories to yourselves?
I would say absolutely. I would say a majority of the women in prison is because of the conspiracy laws, and quite frankly, because of their boyfriends or their husbands, and just our unwillingness to, for lack of a better term, snitch or cooperate, right? Like just the loyalty of women. And I know in my case, and I think also in the case of Natalia and Stephanie, just our going into the courtroom, knowing that we played such a small part, gave us the motivation to fight the case in court, right? Knowing that I wasn't as guilty as you all are saying that I am. And so just also the strong willedness of women to, stand up and fight also played a major part in the sentences that we received. And so, yes, to answer that question, the prison population of women is mostly made up of very small actions attached to larger actions of men. And that conspiracy law that was intended, right, with the war on drugs, that conspiracy law that was intended to target the kingpins. Originally it was, if we pick up a guy off the corner selling weed, then we can charge him with the major production of this conspiracy unless he tells us who the kingpin is. I know in my case, in Natalia's case, kingpin was caught first. And so his sentence was dramatically reduced for every person that he included in the conspiracy, which is why you see low-level people in these, because for me and Natalia, they tried to give us leadership roles, like kingpins are allowed then to bring in whoever to reduce their sentence. And it's ridiculous. But the answer to that question is a lot of women are in prison because of the actions of their spouses.
Absolutely. Like when I've seen they're giving out football numbers to women and for minor roles or just giving a ride to somebody or picking up something. And it's just unbelievable. People are getting life for this. Like it's just insane. It's insane. And like with us, like we played like a minor role. Like they knew where we were, they knew where we lived, they had our addresses. Like our case was going on for years and we didn't even know about it. And they could have picked us up, but it's just like it's a mess. It's all a mess.
And another thing exacerbating these sentences, Evelyn, that you're kind of pointing to is trial penalty. And I know that was certainly at play also for your other co-defendant, Corvain Cooper, who is now serving a life sentence on a nonviolent marijuana charge. And so to describe that, essentially, despite the makeup of our justice system saying everyone innocent until proven guilty, everyone deserves the right to a fair trial, you will very often be penalized for going to trial rather than coming to a plea agreement with a prosecutor, giving up names of some other people that might be wrapped up in this conspiracy, And your refusal to do that, and if you believe, you know, that the charges you're facing are really unjust, as they were in your case, I mean, of course, I think anyone who kind of grows up in America and taking civics classes in high school and thinking, I've got to go to trial, I've got to fight this, and somebody will see that this is unjust. No, you actually get penalized and get even more years added to your sentence for exercising your right to go to trial.
I call that blackmail.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're sitting in jail, especially in the first couple of years, right? Like, we're not even saying the first couple of days, but the first couple of years, you are realizing that you were blackmailed at the fullest extent of the law. I believe in the beginning, they offered me something like 2 years, right? And to me, I was 28 and the attorney was like, oh, you'll be home by the time you're 30. I had a 4-year-old daughter. She'd be 6. That was ridiculous to me. Like, I couldn't even wrap my mind around 24 months. And so, yes, I'm fighting this. I hadn't seen the weed. I hadn't sold the weed. I deposited profits into my account. And like Natalia said, they came back, the federal probation officers came back and recommended to the judge after our trial and after our conviction that we receive 24 years in prison for that. So essentially, our involvement in the case never changed, right? Like, what I had done during the 9 months of this conspiracy had not changed, but you offered me 2 years, but I went to trial and I fought it and lost. And now you're saying I deserve 24 years in prison. And the only way for me to avoid the 24 years in prison was to sign over my rights to an appeal. Yeah. Me and Natalia both gave up all of our rights to appeal our case in the courts to avoid 24 years. And so we accepted our 87 months, our 7 years, excuse my language, damn near with a smile on our face. Because for me, that meant when I came home, my daughter would be almost 30 years old, and she was 4 when I left. And so we waived our rights, and I don't have a better word for that other than blackmail. And Stephanie, I know you experienced the same sort of blackmail.
The harshest part about that to me is they knew what a minor role I played. They so wanted him to stay in that they were willing to just sacrifice me.
Right.
They didn't care if they gave me 10 years. At that time, I was 41 years old. That's
right.
That's a major time in my life. So now here I am, 51, and I'm still trying to play catch up in all aspects of life, all because they couldn't do what they needed to do to keep him in. I got in the way, and they just threw 10 years at me like it was nothing. And don't think you missed out by signing away your appeal rights, because I didn't do that, and I still lost. The same people who put you in are the same people who are going to decide about your appeal. So it's really nothing. It's really a formality.
And I also think that they come up with the plea deal. It's like how could I put it? It's like you're saying that you did something just to get a shorter sentence. It's like you're confessing to something that you didn't do. Or, you know, playing a minor role, but you're like, just to get a conviction or just to get out of prison or whatever, you're gonna sign that paper. But it's like, you know, but I didn't do all these things that you're saying. And it's just like, that's all they want. It's just for you to sign that paper and to have that conviction, and that's it.
Hear it in front of your face that this is what we can talk to the judge if you sign this. There's no guarantee that once you sign it, that's going to happen. And my minor role, I was so convinced that there's no possible way my minor little bit of marijuana that I might have hooked this person up with or hooked that person up with was 1,000 or more kilos, and I should be anywhere involved in that situation. Charge me for what you know
that I did.
Not what he did, not what they did. We're broken up. He's my ex. Goodbye. But still, I walked in there and the judge said he found me responsible and credible, and I recommend he be released into our custody. And an hour later, I was not responsible and credible anymore.
It seems like they put you in prison for his mistake because he couldn't go to prison, so you could.
Oh, he was going to prison too.
Oh.
Everybody, you know, everybody's going to prison.
Everybody's going
to prison. So quickly, we all ended up in prison. And just to piggyback off what Natalia says is when you're signing this plea, you know, because we get a lot of people that judge us, especially when you get to prison. Why did you go to trial? No one beats the feds. They have like a 98% conviction rate. And the minute you get into prison and you tell someone you went to trial, everyone's like, you're stupid, right? Mm-hmm. But the process is they write up a statement of facts, the prosecutor, they have you read it, and part of pleading is signing to that. And like Natalia said, there's so much stuff in there that I had not done, that I just, the refusal to do it and not living this life, right? None of us here live this criminal lifestyle to really consider that cannabis is a big enough problem to be convicted for it, and B, we're just not really understanding that our only option is to plead. Mm-hmm. Right? We are thinking that we have options, like you said. You learn it, you know, social studies, that you have options, and it was. I'm refusing to admit that I did this, and my only option in refusing to admit that I had nothing to do with this portion of it means that I go to trial, and that's where we all ended up at.
It really is, as you guys said, extortion, and the, you know, ideal that you have the right to a fair trial, that innocent until proven guilty. I mean, clearly that is not how, in fact, our justice system operates. And Evelyn, you noted the Fed's 98% conviction rate. That doesn't comport with what we know, who is innocent and who is not in our system, just based on logic. But Evelyn, I want to turn back to you. You mentioned your daughter, who was 4 at the time that you were convicted. Can you tell us about that experience of having to leave your daughter and how that weighed on you in your decision of how you were going to fight your legal battle, and just what that was like to have to be taken away from her for over 7 years?
Absolutely. So I'm reading a comment right in the chat, and he goes, I wanted to fight, but the best option was to lay down like a wounded dog and let the destroyers hit me as soft as possible. I regret daily that I did not do that, because in not doing that, I sacrificed my daughter. So daily I regret not just allowing them and not signing that paper. And then sort of even moving past that regret, once I was convicted, I went into court really not thinking I was going to get convicted, right? And so I dropped my daughter off at daycare on a Monday, flew to fight the trial that started on a Tuesday. And when trial ended on Friday, like my every intention was that I'd be home with my daughter. We had just celebrated her birthday. And then once I'm convicted and shackled and carried off to the county jail, I immediately realized that I had sacrificed her in my ego to fight the feds. And so every decision after that was, well, how do I get home to her? How do I lessen the blow that this will be to my daughter? And I had to realize maybe like halfway through my sentence, because as a mother, as a parent, we're thinking that every decision that we make now has a long-term effect on our child, right? So what am I feeding her? What school is she attending? And so now I'm like, my daughter is a child without a mother. I've ruined her life. And so every just decision after that was, how do I sort of decrease the blow that this is on her life? And which is why I waived my rights to an appeal, which is, you know, why I did the program, why I went back to Victorville, right? To be closer to her, to have those visits. It was 2 years before I got to see my daughter because while we're waiting for sentences, convicted, but not yet sentenced. It took me and Natalia 23 months to be sentenced. So we sat in a county jail in North Carolina, which is directly on the other side of, you know, the United States when you're considering California. And so for 2 years, I had no visits with my daughter. I only had phone calls. And if anyone's ever talked to a 4-year-old over the phone, like that's no real connection. She was 6 by the time I seen her in person when I was transferred to Victorville. And by the time I released, she was just turning 9. And it is not an easy transition back into parenting, back into motherhood. I had spent 5 years fending for myself in prison and sort of in a bubble. And I was saying in the midst of my sentencing, realizing that I'm really no longer her parent, right? Like having to give that up and having to realize that she's in the care of people who love her, people who are equipped to care for her. I'm no longer the decision maker. And so coming home and being, you know, thrust back into that position, it was not an easy transition for me or her because I had been mommy on the phone, not the mommy who cares about what time you go to bed, what are you eating for dinner, what homework looks like. Like she didn't know me as that person. She knew me as mommy who calls twice a day. And when I go see mommy, we eat food out of a vending machine and we play card games. That is something that I think that when the feds are sentencing you, they're only seeing you. They're not seeing the parents that me and Stephanie and Natalia had an aunt. They're not seeing the people that we'll never see again in life that we're coming home to. They're not seeing the children who are without parents, mothers and fathers. They're not seeing that what they've taken from us for the most part can never be replaced. I never seen my daughter lose a tooth. I wasn't at her kindergarten graduation. I remember the first dance recital that I missed, and Natalia came out in tears in her bunk. And I'm like, Natalia, what are you crying for? And she's like, you should have been there. You know, they're not seeing that I missed my grandmother and my stepmother's funeral. They're seeing you're a criminal. No one else matters. That's the hardest part. Stephanie mentioned it in the beginning. Adapting to prison life, not so bad, right? You're in a dorm. You could call it college, right? Like we were all at a camp. I think Stephanie didn't start at a camp, but you survive. We all have instincts to survive, but in order to emotionally survive, I had to learn how to disconnect from the outside world. And in disconnecting, when I came home and I was released, that connection is honestly still a struggle. Just to be back in the world, just in everyday life, to care for others and to receive their care for you, to be responsible for others is still, you know, it's still a struggle almost 2 years later.
And I think this is something we really wanted to touch on with all of you. And I know we're getting a ton of questions. We're going to try to get to as many of your questions at the end. But someone asked more about our programs. And so at LPP, one of our core missions, of course, is around release. And so we actually provide legal representation and legal services for those that are currently incarcerated. But before we had really even developed additional programs, we met Evelyn and we started to hear about all of the difficulties, all of the barriers that are put up when you're coming back to your families, when you're coming back to your community. And we knew that we had to do that work around reentry as well. And so with you guys, I do want to dive a little bit more into the work that we've been doing together around reentry. But first, I want to dive a little deeper into more of those barriers. Evelyn, you touched on the difficulties of just coming back to your family, which I think, we would think, oh, of course, this is going to be the happy thing. This is exciting. But like you said, your daughter was 4 when you went in. You're coming back and she's now 10 years old. It's not going to be an easy transition to, just go back into your family as if nothing ever happened. And so I think that's an example of just the things that if you haven't experienced this, you can't understand all of the difficulties that you'll face when you're coming back. But Stephanie, I know you have had experiences that I'm sure that other women have shared, but I'd love for you to talk about of the difficulties in re-entering the workforce. And you shared with us that before you were incarcerated, you were a successful real estate agent in New York. And so I think, again, even for myself, when I started working with Stephanie, we are working to provide some resources and support for you guys to actually get jobs in the legal industry. And a part of that work involves things like resume reviews and interview workshops. And when I met Stephanie, I said, you've had a really long, successful career. You're a professional. You're not going to need some of this support that we could offer to you. But that wasn't really the case. Stephanie, if you could kind of tell us your experience of generally transitioning back to your life and then touch on some of those aspects of trying to transition back into the workforce.
Okay, so when I before my license was unable to be renewed, I sold real estate, really great real estate company. I got arrested, lost my license, was still just getting a lot of help and support from my family at that time. So after I got out of prison and went to the halfway house, I went to home confinement, and on home confinement, I had to go to a day reporting center across town. So I would go there every day, sometimes twice a day. Sometimes they would call me to check in 3 times a day. They gave me 2 weeks to find a job. That scared me because here I am just getting used to even being home, being in my house, being with my family, still just getting used to that. And now I have got to go out and find a job with this felony. I always had a good career history. And then when I came to having to get a job now, I felt like I couldn't go for a real job. So on the very last day that I was able to get a job without violating, I got a job at a coffee shop. And I was so nervous going into this interview because I knew I would have to have whoever hired me sign off, understand I'm a prisoner, I'm wearing an ankle monitor, just a lot of different anxiety went along with just even applying at a coffee shop. So I told the interviewer that my situation was, and he said, well, just come to the interview anyway. And I went to the interview so nervous. And not only was he there, but his boss was there. So she looked at my resume or my application and she said, your schedule seems to be all over the place. Why is that? And he and I looked at each other because he knew the reason, but she didn't. And she's like, what? And I had to explain to her the entire situation. That's the last thing that you really want to do fresh out of jail, trying to get a job. If you don't get this job, you may violate the next day. So I had to explain the whole entire situation, show her the ankle monitor. And after I told her, she said, you know, I never give comments after I interview. She said, but I want to let you know that if you don't get this job, it's not because of us. We think you would be perfect. So I had to think, okay, I'm not getting the job, but I was grateful for the practice of saying the words, I have a felony. I've been in prison for 10 years. Practicing saying these things each year, but that first time, it was very hard. Like I almost cried in an interview, a job interview. That's how emotional I felt in being so vulnerable and putting myself out there and saying, this is what I was, this is where I've been, and this is where I am now. Mm. So it was difficult. It was emotional.
And I think this is, again, something consistently we see, and I know I've spoken with Evelyn at length about, is part of the work that we do that is sort of unquantifiable is undoing that trauma that you've experienced, but that label that you've now internalized, right? A felony conviction, someone who has broken the law, someone that, Evelyn, you feeling like you deserve this, feeling like you did something wrong. And that led to, this hole in your family. And the work that I think this entire cannabis community, and particularly this industry, has to do is to undo that stigma associated both with this plant, but also with having a conviction on your record. As we've just heard, that doesn't equate to you being a bad person. It certainly doesn't equate to you doing something wrong. And it absolutely does not equate to you deserving this absolutely horrific experience that you've all been through. And so we have to, as a community, do the work to lift you all up and others like you that have experienced the same. And I know we're getting people telling us they've been through similar experiences. You all have to know that that label of a felony conviction, that is nothing that should make you feel like you are undeserving of rebuilding your lives, of finding success and having a productive future. So I hope a little bit of what we can do at LPP is tear down that stigma and that shame that none of you should be feeling at all. Briefly, because I do want to have time to dive into all of the questions we're getting. Natalia, I wanted to circle back on what you described of having to deal with some really awful health issues while you were incarcerated. Mm-hmm. We are currently in a moment amidst a pandemic. The coronavirus continues to ravage our correctional facilities. We have some of our correctional facilities in the US are global epicenters now of this virus. They have infection rates that are 10 times that of other global hotspots like Wuhan, China, places like Rikers Island and Cook County Jail. So I think anyone that is incarcerated right now is deeply at risk of facing a serious health issue. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your experience was like trying to access sufficient health care while being incarcerated?
When I first found out that I was sick, it took me maybe 10 times in order for them to pay attention to me. I had to fill out grievances, and going to the trip to the doctor were $20 a piece. So I did it over and over. Every time I went, she would tell me, "Oh, just take a warm shower," or "Oh, it's just nothing. It'll go away." And mind you, in the county jail, they don't have warm water. It's cold. And come to find out, they tried to give me pain medication to quiet me down, so I wouldn't, keep coming back to the doctor. And I refused it. And once I refused the pain medication, that's when they start paying attention to me, because they're so used to people saying that they're sick so they can get, narcotics and pain medication. The doctor literally called me down and was like, "I know something's wrong because you just refused this medication." So I went and got tested. I left and didn't come back for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then I was diagnosed with lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. It was to the point where I was 114 pounds, but my feet had swole up like I was a 300-pound woman. So I know that there was definitely something wrong. I got some medical attention. They got it under control. But then I had transferred over to the feds. And again, something was wrong. Like within a week, I couldn't walk. I had trouble walking. And he told me that it was indigestion. I couldn't walk. I started passing out. In the shower. Come to find out, I had a blood clot. I went into cardiac arrest. I had a blood clot in my lungs, and it worked so hard that it overpowered my heart. So my heart failed. And I was on life support for maybe 2 weeks, a week and a half. And I woke up and my family was there. So it's very difficult for them to pay attention. They don't believe you when you say, something's wrong. They just think that you're trying to get something out of them, or they'll try to pass it on to the next person, but then nothing gets done about it. So I had to deal with that for many, many years. My mom told me every day they asked, do you want to pull the plug? Would you like to pull the plug? Because I wasn't waking up. And my mom said no. So thankfully for my mom, I'm here today. And now I'm trying to restore what has been damaged to my body, trying to get referrals to doctors and to the right specialists. I believe that if I would have had the proper medical care and at an efficient rate, that this could have been prevented. But now I am dealing with the consequences of the neglect of the medical care in the prison system.
I have to jump in quickly because I witnessed it all. And my experience was completely different from Natalia's because of health, right? Like here I am healthy and she's not. And I'm jumping in to call out names. We were in Arizona and Natalia, we're raised like family, by the way, for the audience, right? Like me and Natalia have been raised together, and she passes out. And so they call the lieutenant, and the lieutenant says, "Let me find out you're passing out for more narcotics. Go back to sleep." So then the morning comes and everyone rushes to me. Natalia passed out last night. Get her to Dr. Ford, and he gets in his computer and says, "Oh, it's because I haven't given you your acid reflux medicine. Go take a nap. You'll have acid reflux medicine by pill call this afternoon." She goes, eats some crackers, gets in the shower, passes out again, is rushed to the hospital. And all her organs are failing, and they are refusing to call her family. Had I not been there, her mother would have not been in that hospital room because I made the call in 2 minutes. 3 days had gone by, they had not called her mother. Chaplain has to tell the warden, you know, she has family here. Her family is already aware. That's when they make the decision. Otherwise, as an inmate, could you imagine being sick and not being able to call 911? To know that you are about to die and you can't call 911 yourself, and the doctor is telling you you have acid reflux. I don't get upset about much. That's ridiculous. And then for her to sit in the hospital for days without them notifying her family, only notified because I was there to make the phone call. And as a penalty, she spends an extra year in prison because a halfway house or the Federal Bureau of Prison is saying you're a liability. If we release you while you're still in our care and something happens to you, it's our responsibility. So stay in prison for another 12 months. We got the same sentence. I got out a year before her because I was healthy. In what world does that make sense?
In the world of our criminal justice system that continues to penalize individuals for being sick. And this is something that, you know, now, Natalia, we've talked about all of the emotional scars that you all are going to have to live with because of these experiences. Natalia, you're also dealing with very real physical ramifications of your time in incarceration that could have absolutely been mitigated had you had the proper access to care. So again, this is something that we at Last Prisoner Project are deeply concerned about amidst the COVID pandemic. We do have a COVID relief response. If you go to our website, lastprisonerproject.org/COVID-19, part of that work is, again, providing legal assistance. We've set up a compassionate release program to pair eligible constituents with pro bono attorneys to try to get released. In the absence of that, we want to at least make sure that any of our constituents that need access to outside care are able to access that. And so if you go to our website, you can donate directly to that fund, which ensures that our constituents have the financial assistance they need to access outside care, since obviously the care within a facility is not typically adequate. Well, thank you, ladies, so much for sharing these stories. I think we've all teared up on this webinar, gotten emotional. It's a very emotional topic, obviously, for all of us and for myself. Getting to work with you all and knowing how absolutely wonderful you are, hearing what you've suffered is just, I can't imagine it. And I know a lot of the folks listening are feeling the same. But as I've told you all, it really does make such a big difference, especially for our supporters who are partaking in the legal cannabis industry, to understand what is still occurring because of prohibition and the past devastating effects of prohibition. So we at LPP do absolutely believe that we in the industry, or even anyone that is a cannabis consumer, has a duty to try to repair these past harms of prohibition. And one thing that we have been working on together is our reentry program. Evelyn, we like to say you were the first participant, although at the time it was a much more informal program. And I'm going to try to answer some questions all at one time. I know we have a lot, so if we don't get to you, feel free to shoot us an email. It's info@lastprisonerproject.org, or check out our website, lastprisonerproject.org, because we have a lot of useful information on our website. But Evelyn, you actually are now employed in the legal industry in California. Can you tell us about that experience and coming out, having been incarcerated for a cannabis offense, what it felt like, whether you wanted to participate in the legal industry, and I guess what that decision looked like.
So many parts go into that, especially. I got to speak with Kelly Perez yesterday, and she's like, make sure that you are, upfront about the laws concerning what it is to be a felon in the industry. And so as it stands, I'm not allowed to carry, be in the room with, work with the plant at all. And I'm at Vertosa, and, thankfully enough, their plant is completely different from where our offices are. And so I'm able to work in the industry without touching the plant, which I think is a major factor when we're talking about reentry and moving forward. Is there positions for people like me in leadership, in the office, working in roles outside of dispensaries, where typically social equity programs are, guiding us all towards like ownership in dispensaries, which we're not allowed in. And I won't be allowed in that space for another 3 years. And so how do we find our space in the legal industry? And at Vertosa, I'm the community engagement manager. And so it was perfect for me. To answer the question of, is this what I was coming home to do? Absolutely not. I can honestly say that the feds had completely scared me of ever coming into contact with the plant again. I had no intentions. And it was at the fundraising event that LPP had at Big Rock that I was able to share my story. And so in speaking to what Last Prisoner Project has individually done for me, sharing my story has validated the process. It has allowed me to move out of the mindset of I'm a criminal, I deserve this, I'm a bad parent, all of that, and move me into the mindset of I was definitely a victim of a completely unjust system. And that alone from LPP is enough, right? Like that alone was able to change and shift the way that I even approached the world. And so coming into the legal industry, it was really because, like Stephanie mentioned, I took the leap of faith of finding a real job as a felon. And I found that job doing what I did prior to prison, which was a sales and catering coordinator. And I got a job at a pretty prominent hotel in in San Francisco. Stephanie texted me one day. She's like, how's it going? Basically you're an inspiration. If you got that job, I know for sure that we're going to make it. And I was like, I don't know. It seems like somebody's going to tap me on my shoulder and tell me this is a lie. And truth be told, 2 months on the job, HR tapped me on my shoulder and had me pack up my belongings because, a coworker had Googled my name and now I'm fired. And so that partnered with connecting with LPP and telling my story and sort of validating my process, had me sharing my story in San Francisco, where the CEO and the Chief Innovation Officer of Vertosa was in the audience. And Austin, the Chief Innovation Officer, he's like, well, we've got to get you in the industry. What do you do? And I was like, I'm an events person. I'm an events coordinator. Like I do events. So I don't see a space for me in the cannabis industry. I have no intentions of selling, the flower. And they had an events director position that has evolved into community engagement manager. And now I don't see myself ever leaving the industry. Now I am to a place where I feel like it owes me, for one, right? Like I sat down for 5 years as corporate have sort of come in and taken over the plan and moved it to this industry that is essential during a global pandemic. And I think it owes me, and I have no intentions of leaving it. I have every intention of making it my own. Just recently, just to touch on what it is to be a felon in this space, is I tried to open an account on First Trade, right, to trade stocks, and was denied the opportunity. And cannabis is traded, right? Corporate cannabis is traded on the legal market and I'm unable to participate in that. And so this is me taking my piece back, and I am in this industry for the long haul.
Touched on two things there. I think it's really important to tease out. The first is the laws. And this is a big part of the other piece of what we do at LPP around policy reform. Even in a state like California, because you got caught up in the federal system, and of course, federally, this is still illegal, you're now barred from actually participating in the industry. Similarly, in a lot of states that have legalized, even if you have a state level offense that is a cannabis offense, you're barred from participating in the industry, either in terms of being an employee or as an operator or owner. So that's a critical piece of the work that we do and that we all need to be thinking of in terms of reform efforts, is breaking down those legal and regulatory barriers for anyone with a cannabis conviction to participate in the industry. But the second piece is that there's opportunity. Like you said, Evelyn, because of the way that a lot of these companies are structured, they have entities that are not plant touching, and they certainly have a lot of roles that don't involve being in a plant touching position. And I know from my work that companies are always looking for folks to do exactly what you're doing, Evelyn, community engagement and corporate social responsibility. No one is in a better position to lead companies and how they're going to fight against these injustices and work to repair the harms of prohibition than women like you who have actually experienced the most devastating consequences. So just throwing that out there to any of our industry partners who might be listening, a really easy way to give back is ensure that you're actually opening up opportunities for individuals that might have cannabis convictions. And that's certainly a part of the work that we are all working on together. I think we have time for one last question. I know there's a ton in here. I'm gonna try to combine a few. So first, we absolutely have opportunities for both industry partners to get involved as well as for individuals to volunteer. Again, you can go to our website, that's lastprisonerproject.org/get involved. So that is definitely ways people can partner with us or volunteer. We don't currently provide pre-conviction assistance. If you need that, you can reach out to us and we will absolutely loop you in with one of our partners that might be able to provide pro bono assistance pre-conviction. We focus on post-conviction relief. And in our system, once you're convicted, before you're convicted, everyone has the right to an attorney. Post-conviction, you have no right to legal assistance. So that's a big gap that LPP seeks to fill, is providing pro bono legal assistance for individuals who are at the point of post-conviction. But one question that kind of ties into that I'm interested in hearing from you all is, what kind of legal assistance did you receive both pre and post conviction?
Of course, they appointed us. The court appointed attorneys, and then I begged my family, and they hired. I'm dropping names today. Randolph Lee was trash. They hired him. He was paid in cash, and he definitely was maybe one step away from falling asleep in the courtroom. And I think that led also to the conviction. And then post-conviction, I hired another attorney. So 35, 15, 15,000 for the second attorney. And he did a wonderful job, right? He took the 239 months and got us down to this 87 months. Awesome, phenomenal. I'm still paying him. And that was sort of the legal, but I think a lot of the work that needs to be done is in reentry and the clemency efforts, right? Because when I got to prison, so you can't file for clemency until you're actually on a federal prison facility. So we spent 2 years in the county jail. So for 2 years, we were unable to even petition for clemency. And then once you get to the federal prison, you're allowed to petition for clemency to the President of the United States, but you're doing it on your own. It's a form, you fill it out, they ask you to like attach your story, but we're in prison doing this with a pen and a piece of paper. It is no wonder why our petitions were denied, because we did not have the legal backing or any assistance really in that process. And there is no, there's no free attorneys. I know under Obama administration, he initiated that whole clemency project, which was great, but it still was not enough to feed the however many inmates that we have in the system. And so it was completely backlogged by the time he was coming out of office. So you don't have assistants. You have other inmates in prison who are acting as attorneys and lawyers. We all know those, and they're helping you on the typewriter. But we are reduced to a typewriter and pen and paper trying to fight our cases.
And I assume similarly, Natalia and Stephanie, not a lot of post-conviction assistance. That's, I think one thing that LPP is doing that's different from a lot of the organizations, and there's a ton, and shout out, someone mentioned Freedom Grow, Human Solution, we work with Can Do Clemency, Weldon Project, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. This work is going to take a movement. And so we're very grateful for the other organizations that are doing this work with us. But one thing that we're doing that is a bit unique is our clemency program, and ensuring that we're providing attorneys to actually assist with clemency petitions. It is something that you're able to draft yourself, but of course it helps to have an attorney and someone who might have access to the executive offices that are going to be, at the end of the day, the ones making those determinations. And so a big piece of what we do in terms of our advocacy is working with those executive offices to ensure that, especially in states that have fully legalized, that they are providing opportunities for commutations for those still incarcerated on cannabis offenses.
And Sarah,
Yeah.
In terms of the clemency, like that was great, and seeing people get out, that was really great. But for me, I had a mandatory minimum, and mandatory is mandatory. So I was not even eligible to fill out the clemency form. And I just kept saying, all of this over marijuana. Like, is this real? Like, 5 years to wake up and go, hey, this is real. Because before I was Karen, before Karen was Karen, I was wanting to see the warden. I want to see your manager. You guys had time to adjust 2 years in. They didn't care about me. They're like, boom, 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 gone. So I only stayed in a holding facility possibly 3 months total before going straight to prison. So I was still street ready, street attitude, street mindset that this isn't happening and I need to see your manager. And that was not good. It did not work for me. So just having that time that you guys had to get adjusted, like, that was great.
That's exactly who Stephanie was in prison. And I just want to ask the audience, like, we're able to laugh at this because we spent time in prison together, right? So I'm able to know that she was a Karen before Karen, and I need to speak to your supervisor, sir. And I was experienced a lot of the time with Natalia. And so we're able to like sit back and laugh, being on the outside, because you walk into there thinking, this can't be real. This is not happening. And we did have the first 2 years. I sat in the county thinking, any day they're calling my name, I'm getting out of here. I'm waiting for sentencing. When I get to sentencing, they're going to say time served. I'm out of here. And it never happens. And you're right. You're looking around like this can't be. And I know me and Stephanie have shared before, but we're sitting in the TV room together and we're watching TV in a TV room that we're probably not allowed to be in at this time. It's like 11 o'clock and the news comes on and they're like, oh, Channel 7 News at 11, we're going to explore how the cannabis industry is growing. And the founder gets on there and she goes, how's the industry doing for you? And she says, business is booming. And Stephanie turns around and looks at me and she's like, Evelyn, business is booming. And I'm like, and you're doing 10 years? I'm doing 7. And on the news in Beverly Hills, California, business is booming. Like, ridiculous.
And I think that answers the final question I was going to ask, which is just, I mean, the injustice of being incarcerated and at the same time watching this legal industry booming around you. And again, this is something we've discussed, but a lot of people think that automatically as legalization happens and these laws get passed, that everyone that's in prison is going to be released once this is legalized and the laws have changed. That is not the case. There is no retroactive relief currently for those still incarcerated on cannabis offenses. And to your point, Stephanie, that's why the work has to go beyond the direct services we provide and why we really have to work to change laws and change hearts and minds. And that's why I think it is so incredible for people to be able to hear your stories, hear what you've gone through, really understand and get to know from an emotional level what the face of this problem really looks like. Because again, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take all of us in this community. It's going to take every operator in this industry to go to our elected officials, to go to the lawmakers and demand change, demand that we release every last cannabis prisoner. So again, I want to thank you ladies so much for taking the time to share your stories. I know it was an incredibly emotional experience for all of us. But again, I think as we've seen from the comments, the questions, it really does work to change people's mind and to educate people. And so my call to the audience is to, again, check out our website and find out how you can get engaged, find out how you can make those asks of your state lawmakers, of our federal government, because together we are really in a moment where we've seen the power of being able to harness a collective movement. And we can do that in this industry with this community. And so we definitely hope that this has inspired all of you to work with us to create change. So again, thank you all. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We will be back next month with another webinar. This will also be available on Kush.com, their YouTube channel. And thank you, Kush, for having us.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Share it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.